I have the honor of introducing Professor James Caesar. Jim is the Harry F. Byrd Professor of Politics and the director of the program on constitutionalism and democracy at the University of Virginia, a program that the Jack Miller Center has happily supported for a number of years. Jim is also a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution. He serves on the Jack Miller Center's board of directors and as chair of our academic council. He is a regular faculty lecturer at our summer institutes. Jim has written several well-known books and highly praised books on American politics and political thought. He has held visiting professorships at the University of Florence, the University of Basel, Oxford University, the University of Bordeaux. I'm worried about his French sympathies, the University of Rennes, as well as Harvard and Princeton. He is a frequent contributor to the popular press, including a little-known journal called The Weekly Standard at National Review. Jim also won the very prestigious Bradley Prize in 2015. And like Bill Kristol, he received his PhD in political science from Harvard University. So please join me in welcoming Jim Caesar.
Thanks, Mike, for that kind introduction, or two or three introductions, but no one can speak without being introduced. He mentioned that I teach at the University of Virginia, which probably all of you know was founded by two of our great national founders, Thomas Jefferson and James Madison. Now I have the great pleasure this evening of introducing a modern founder, which is Jack Miller, who founded over a decade ago the Jack Miller Center for Teaching of America's Founding Principles and History. That's the full title of the association, which he is the chairman of and the moving force behind. And I think it pretty well describes what the foundation is devoted to, as it says, teaching especially at the higher level, university level, but also at the high school level as well, America's founding principles, so the principles of our founders, but also all the things that stand behind and go into the teaching of American principles at the time of the founding, which is the philosophers behind them in the 18th century and 17th century. So this, in a way, expands well beyond just the founding, but the core is the founding, and of history as well, as brought up today, whether we have any historians who are actually teaching this thing. It's difficult to find them, but the effort surely is there. And it's also truly appropriate that this event is taking place here in Chicago, because it was here in Chicago that the idea of the Jack Miller Center was conceived. Here, in fact, right at the University of Chicago, at a conference, I believe in 2004, which was held by among a number of university professors. We were asked at the time to think about the problem of civic education at the higher level, why it was declining, why so few students were enrolled in any courses, and all the difficulties pertaining to, at this conference at which academics, of course, presented their different points of view, supreme analysis of why everything was failing. There were some other people there, some philanthropists of some sort, and one of them was Jack Miller. He heard the conversation. I never met him at this conference, but he heard the conversation. He picked up on an idea which he thought was worthwhile, and after the conference ended, we all went home thinking it was a nice conference. We wouldn't do anything about it, but it was a couple of nice days in Chicago. And Jack immediately moved to get this organization of his set up and to do it quickly and effectively. So I think it's, as I said, very appropriate that we come back to Chicago for this event, and also because so many members of the board of the Miller Center are from Chicago or connected with Chicago. And that would be Jack's wife, Goldie Miller, who's probably, I think, handled every piece of big real estate in Chicago since that time, and has been a great member of the board. And John Lillard has been in Chicago a very, very long time. I also point out a graduate of the University of Virginia, but and a great supporter of the University of Virginia. we're happy to have him on the board as a really important participant. Doug Regan, I don't think he's here this evening, but he's in financial circles here in Chicago. And of course, I met today, not on the board, but one of our members, Tom Kelly, who's involved in this project here of Chicago of extending Miller Center principles to high school teachers and private teachers in the area all throughout. Now, Jack's plan was, I think, to build, I use this fancy term used in politics, the infrastructure, but I think that is the right term, for saving and enhancing the teaching of founding principles. And when you think of what's called in the infrastructure in an academic sense, it's a huge enterprise. You've got to find graduate students who have some interest in this subject of teaching and let them know that there's some place for them inside of modern academia. And that involves getting them together, getting them to know each other, getting them to study together at places where the emphasis in teaching on this is not very strong. So it's handling a lot of education outside of the university classroom. So to get them involved, to get them placed inside of universities where they can begin to have an effect, to learn how to organize things on their own universities outside the regular classroom in terms of setting up institutes and whatnot. But ultimately, I think with the view of getting them to teach courses on the American founding and American history in a serious way. That's the place where the rubber hits the road. And I think thousands and thousands of students over the last 10 years have been affected by this program indirectly, by Jack's influence, which is to get the teachers in the classrooms to teach these courses. And that's a magnificent achievement. I think inside of academia, as was indicated this afternoon, academia is a pretty conservative place, conservative in a literal sense. It's hard to change. It doesn't move very much. So one thing about that is you can't remove people who are doing damage inside of academia. They're there and they're not going anywhere. On the other hand, they can't remove me or others like that, so it's a good standoff for the time being. But the idea is to try and influence the change, I would say, slowly, which is maybe the only way it can do, but not so slowly that it isn't having a huge impact. So that means slowly getting people into positions where they're teaching, slowly building up institutes at different places, slowly trying to make something like Constitution Day a true national holiday, and all measures such as that. So the Jack Miller Center, even though it began here in Chicago, is a national organization. It has outposts, maybe not in Hawaii, but I know there's some in Alaska, all the way across the country, from the northwest to the east and the south. So, a lot of people are involved in this enterprise, and it's growing. Jack has lent a great deal of his organizational abilities in running this institution, a great deal of the resources which he's given to it, but it's really a lot more than a one-person job. It's now turning into a large organization. And I think I can speak for Jack as well, that he's open, willing, ready, and eager to have others join in this battle. Jack, thank you.
Oh, I could still make it. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. Jim, thank you very much. I appreciate the introduction. Somebody once said that, and then they said I deserve it. But no, thank you very much. It's my pleasure this evening to be introducing the nation's leading academic proponent of free speech on campus, Robert J. Zimmer, the president of the University of Chicago. In 2016, President Zimmer wrote a commentary piece, you heard about it this afternoon, that appeared in the you didn't hear about this, that appeared in the Wall Street Journal. It was about free speech is the basis of a true education. In it, toward the end, he wrote, quote, universities should be clear about the core educational mission to provide students with the most enriching education possible. This means that questioning and challenge must flourish, end of quote. But he wasn't the first one that talked about that. About 155 years before that, somewhere in the mid-1800s, John Stuart Mill, who you heard referenced earlier, Peter Berkowitz mentioned him, explained why that is true. And I'll paraphrase what Mill said. 1, if the suppressed opinion is true, then humanity is deprived of hearing the truth. 2, if the suppressed opinion is false, then humanity loses finding that their opinion really is true. And 3, if the revised opinion and the suppressed opinion share the truth between them, then humanity gets a more complete truth. And finally, quoting from Mill in full, quote, if individuals are not allowed to follow their intellect to whatever conclusion they may lead, then people will be prevented from attaining the mental development of which they are capable. So obviously this argument about free speech has been going on for a very long time. But during my lifetime, which by the way also has been going on for a very long time, I have never seen so much vitriol, hatred, violence used to suppress free speech as we see today on many campuses. So President Zimmer's full-throated, very strong defense of it is very welcome. In fact, he has written a document that the president of Purdue dubbed the Chicago Principles, and it's a set of guidelines on free expression and free and open inquiry on all matters, and some other universities have adopted it. But in addition to his moral courage in leading this fight, President Zimmer also has credentials to fill his daytime job as president of one of the finest universities in the country. He previously served as a University of Chicago faculty member and administrator for more than 2 decades. He specialized in the mathematical fields of geometry and differential geometry, and listen carefully, particularly ergodic theory and Lie groups, whatever the hell that is. Since I didn't know what ergodic theory was, I Googled it. And I found out that I couldn't understand the explanation either. So maybe you'll enlighten us. In any event, he was a provost at Brown University. He earned his A.B. summa cum laude in 1968. That was way back when grades meant something in school. He got that from Brandeis University, a PhD in mathematics from Harvard in 1975, and he joined the Chicago faculty as an instructor of mathematics in 1977. He also serves on many boards. Folks, for the past 14 years, during the summer institutes, and at other Miller Center events, I've had the opportunity to talk to hundreds of young postdocs and young professors. And I hear them telling me that they are afraid to express their opinions in the classrooms or on campus until they get tenure so that they can't be fired. And it's not until then, which is how many years? 10 years, 5 years? Until they get tenure, that they're not free to speak their mind on campus. That's a hell of a lousy way to run a university. And so it is with great pleasure that I introduce President Robert Zimmer, a true leader in this fight for freedom of speech, a fight in which we are happy to join with him. President Zimmer.
Okay, thanks very much, Jack. It's a great pleasure for me to have the opportunity to speak with you today. My topic will not be ergodic theory, but if you have any questions about it at the end, I'll be happy to answer it. So my topic, of course, is free expression, open discourse, and intellectual challenge on university campuses and their relationship to education and to discovery. The universities and colleges in our country are at an important juncture in coping with this issue, a juncture in which each institution will define what it is, what it stands for, the nature of its education and its research environments, and how it is contributing to the future capabilities of its students and faculty, and collectively what this means for the country as a whole. This is therefore a big topic, one I know that people here are quite interested in, and today I'd like to discuss briefly 4 aspects. First, why is free expression important on university campuses? Second, what is the actual state of free expression on university campuses? Third, what are the causes of where we are, which is not in a good spot? And fourth, what can be done about our current situation? So let me begin with the first topic. What is free expression about and why is it important? So particularly this group here is, of course, familiar with the First Amendment to the United States Constitution, which states in part, Congress shall make no laws abridging the freedom of speech. And I don't have to tell this group that this simple yet profound statements had an enormous positive and important impact on this country. However, the First Amendment is explicitly about what government can or cannot do. As such, public universities, effectively government agents, have some First Amendment obligations. Private colleges and universities, however, do not. The First Amendment says nothing about what private institutions can or cannot do about speech. But while not about the First Amendment, universities, both public and private, do have an obligation not connected to the First Amendment, but connected to their very mission. And that obligation is to educate students in the most empowering way and give them the capacity and habits of mind and of action that will enable them to confront the complex challenges they will face in their future. And at the same time, universities in their research mission have an obligation to their faculty to afford them an intellectual and research environment that will enable them to do their deepest, most original, and most impactful work. And it is exactly here in the environment for students' education and faculty research that the issue of free expression on university campuses, public or private, is so important. And so why exactly is that? So education is a tool for both personal growth and enhancing students' capacity to face future challenges. For a student, in a simple way, this requires acquisition of knowledge and the production of work. But critically, it also demands the development of habits of mind and ways of thinking about issues and problems that will inform action and be relevant to students for their entire lives. And what are these habits of mind and action that students need to develop? Confronting new and different ideas, comfort with questioning others and oneself, recognition of one's own assumptions as well as those of others, understanding the power and limitations of an argument, perceiving the power of context, culture, and history, recognizing legitimate competing interests, analyzing unintended consequences, knowing the difference between a wish and an argument, understanding the inevitability of complexity and the need in many cases to leave behind the temptation of simplicity, exposure to and grappling with unfamiliar modes of inquiry, synthesizing different perspectives, and being able to articulate and coherently advocate a position. All these are skills that students should acquire through their education and that faculty need to impart in delivering that education. And they are likewise critical tools for faculty in their own research work, and that an environment in which these qualities are lived every day is essential for the most powerful research and education environment. The single most important ingredient in this task is intellectual challenge. This, in turn, only happens at the highest level in an environment of rigor, questioning, and free and open discourse. Such an environment is not uniformly comfortable. For the participants, it's not designed to be comfortable. In fact, to be effective, this environment of challenging one's assumptions inevitably creates discomfort, but a discomfort that is necessary for growth, understanding, and achievement. Thus, it's because of the very mission of universities that free expression and open discourse are intrinsic to their excellence. Now, the perspective I've just described is not just mine, but in fact has been the basis of the University of Chicago approach to education since its inception in the late 19th century. Its importance has been articulated by its leaders and its faculty over this entire time. And it is this perspective that has constantly put the University of Chicago in the forefront of defending free expression, open discourse, and academic freedom, as it is again today. Now, while this has been embedded in the University of Chicago culture for over a century, about 5 years ago, as I watched other universities disinvite such individuals as Laura Bush, Henry Kissinger, Christine Lagarde, Condoleezza Rice, and Larry Summers, because a segment of their community didn't want people to hear them, I believe that we needed a clear statement that captured this long-standing Chicago view on free expression. I appointed a faculty committee chaired by Jeffrey Stone, a distinguished scholar of constitutional law, to produce such a document. And I want to emphasize that the committee's charge was not, how do we think about free expression? The committee's charge was, we know what we think about free expression, write down a powerful articulation of those principles. And they did a good job. This University of Chicago statement, reaffirming in the strongest possible terms our institutional commitment to open discourse and free expression, has become known as the Chicago Principles, which I will return to in a few minutes. And as Jack indicated in his introduction, that name was actually given by Mitch Daniels because Mitch called me up and said, it was the first university to respond this way. He called me up and said, I want Purdue to adopt these principles wholesale. Are you okay if I call them the Chicago Principles? I said, yes, Mitch, I'm okay. So with this view of the importance of free expression in hand, let me now turn to the second topic, namely the actual situation on many university campuses. And I know you've already had some discussion about this. Now, to provide some context, let me first say that the higher education system in the United States does remain the strongest in the world. The variety of institutions, their level of autonomy, healthy competition between them, and long-term bipartisan federal support for science, research, and education all contribute to the robustness of the system. However, there are a number of very serious challenges to this national higher education fabric, challenges that affect both the capacity to remain the most dynamic research environment in the world and the capacity to deliver high-quality education. So I'll just quickly list these challenges, the last one being our topic today. So one is the question of access, cost, and student debt. Another is the dramatic and, to my mind, deeply destructive decrease in funding by most states for their public universities. Still another is related to immigration policies and whether the United States remains the most attractive destination for study and research by the most talented people from around the world. And just to give you a tiny little inkling into this, if you look at Americans who have won the Nobel Prize in science, so that means either in physics, chemistry, or medicine, 40%, and these are people in U.S. universities. 40% have not been born in the United States, were immigrants. So this is not including people whose parents immigrated to the United States. So this is actually a very serious issue for us. But the final challenge is our topic for today, namely an environment of dramatically decreased commitment to open discourse and free expression. And as I have described, an implicit decreased commitment to the excellence of education and research environments. Now, how is this decreased commitment manifest? The most dramatic and public ways are the long list of disinvited speakers, other invited speakers being shouted down and not allowed to speak, and faculty being called to task, even if they have tenure, in a variety of ways for having controversial views. Sometimes violence has erupted because of the objections of a segment of a university community to a speaker's views or background. These, however, are just overt symptoms of more widespread and deeper problems. On some campuses, there is a tone of discourse ostracizing those with currently unpopular views. Faculty are concerned, again, tenured or not, faculty are concerned about bringing up certain topics and ideas for fear not of disagreement, but of being demonized. And some university administrations are actually stimulating an environment in which students' feelings of discomfort with ideas take precedence over the importance of actually discussing ideas. How students interact with each other is often a casualty of these damaging tendencies. Students should be learning from each other by working through and discussing different opinions, analyses, backgrounds, perspectives, and cultures. But the environment of demonization and ostracism of those with opposing views can choke the inter-student discourse that's vital to an education. To my mind, it is essential that this not be abetted by faculty and administrations, but that the latter work very hard to combat it and create an environment for respectful, open discourse that allows for deep disagreements. So my third topic is, how did all this happen? So I'm going to offer three contributing causes. First, one should not be surprised there are forces opposed to free expression and open discourse. Many people really don't like free expression. They fully support and are deeply committed to free expression for people they agree with. But tolerating speech that you may find offensive, dumb, morally questionable, politically objectionable, producing discomfort, religiously undesirable, all this is not something everyone naturally embraces. We've seen this throughout history, and we've seen it in this country with innumerable challenges to the First Amendment on many such grounds. Therefore, in promoting an environment of free expression, one is always working against a strong undercurrent that may rise and become visible at any moment. In other words, the first reason this is happening is that some people are simply trying to keep views unexpressed out of a self-righteous moral or political indignation, an agenda driven by such moral or political views, and comfort arrogating to themselves and those they agree with the right of speech while denying it to others. I have never heard anybody say speech should be denied to people they agree with. Now, the second contributing cause is what I view as a deeply misguided response to genuine and appropriate concern about exclusion and the particular exclusionary history in the United States. It is important that our country recognize the destructive history and still present legacy of slavery and some of the deeply exclusionary history of racism, homophobia, anti-Semitism, misogyny, anti-immigrant behavior, and more. Our country's made very significant strides in dealing with these issues, but there's much more to do, and one can never take for granted that we are moving in a uniformly positive direction. Universities around the country are certainly not immune from needing to deal with these issues, and it's important they do so. But one unfortunate response to this genuine need are calls to suppress views or speech, either by specific individuals or on certain topics or with certain perspectives that are deemed by some segment of the university community to go against efforts at inclusion. Without pretending to address every possible circumstances, I believe these efforts at suppression in the name of inclusion have been deeply misguided and done a great deal of harm. In fact, I believe that inclusion requires recognition that all students need help in dealing with and being productive in an environment of open discourse, and that inclusion demands giving all students the best possible education that we can. To limit the quality of education for all students, including traditionally excluded groups, is not the inclusion that we should be seeking. We need to trust that all students have the capacity to engage open discourse and intellectual challenge and be empowered by this for the rest of their lives. And that is the inclusion that we want. The third contributing effect is the privileging of feelings. I think we all recognize that parenting, and in some cases schooling, is much more focused on children's feelings than might have been the case a generation or two or three ago. Generally, this is a positive, particularly the extent that it helps to develop highly functioning adults who derive satisfaction from their personal relationships and their work and who can contribute to society beyond themselves. On the other hand, the ultimate goal is to produce adults. Privileging feelings to the extent that a child feels they are always entitled to feel good and comfortable and that the world should be organized around this is not very helpful in this regard. And what we are seeing in some cases within high schools and universities is an expectation and then demands for such privileging and then the inappropriate acquiescence to such demands. There was recently an article in the news about the demand on the part of certain high school students to not have to make in-class presentations if it made them feel uncomfortable. One high school student was quoted as saying, "No one should have to do anything that makes them feel uncomfortable." Now, while one wants to be forgiving, in truth, this statement is both sad and completely divorced from reality. But remarkably, allowing this tone to take hold and fostering acquiescence to this perspective is another problem that is seeping into high schools and universities. So to summarize this section of causes, I've described the resistance to free expression because of strongly held moral or political views, a misguided approach to dealing with a genuine history of exclusionary behavior, and an excessive privileging of feelings beyond what can produce healthy adults. Finally, my fourth topic, what is to be done about this? 4 years ago, when I appointed the faculty committee that articulated the Chicago principles, and then subsequently when I wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal that Jack was also very kind enough to refer to, raising the entire issue of free expression. So again, at that time, there was so much nervousness and discomfort about the issue that in general, universities weren't even talking about it or acknowledging that there was a problem. Over the past 4 years, at least partially in response, the subject has come to the fore and there is a great deal more discussion. About 40 universities have signed on to the Chicago principles or crafted their own version of them. Now, this may sound significant, and it is, but given that there are over 2,000 four-year colleges or universities in this country, those expressing strong conviction about free expression and open discourse represent only about 2%. Of course, this is much better than when the University of Chicago stood all alone in this regard, but the silence of the remaining 98% is itself a powerful statement as to where we are. And silence and the lack of discourse about discourse is a deep problem. What is required is a visible and articulated commitment by both the leadership of universities and the faculty of universities to open discourse and the environment of intellectual challenge that comes with it. Without clear principles that are articulated as principles, there can sometimes, often, be no firm ground to stand on when dealing with a particular situation, and the responses become reactive rather than principle-based, or at least can certainly be seen as such. To make progress, the issue of open inquiry and intellectual challenge and its importance to the very core of what universities are about needs to be addressed by those responsible for the long-term capacity of universities to fulfill their education and research missions with distinction. And this resides with the faculty and leadership of universities, including presidents, provosts, deans, and the board. Now, having said a few words about what should be done, let me say what should not be done, and that is to overly politicize the problem. While it is true that right now, many of the most visible challenges to free expression come from the self-identified left, this has not always been the case and will not always be the case. Challenges to free expression can come, have come, and will come again from every part of the political spectrum. Well, of course, it is important to always recognize and acknowledge where challenges are coming from at a particular moment. Supporting free expression and open discourse on university campuses is ultimately about the quality of education and research environment, not the particular political battles of the day. Making it primarily about today's politics undermines a commitment to free expression for the long run. So in conclusion, let me emphasize the stakes. Higher education has demonstrated over and over again its capacity to change the lifelong opportunities of individuals, the trajectory of families, and the nature of our society. It must continue to do this for reasons both human and societal. Being successful demands giving students the tools to confront complex problems, challenge assumptions, act with forethought, and work with people of very different views and perspectives. It demands giving faculty the open and challenging environment where they can experiment, explore, challenge existing paradigms, test their ideas freely, and attempt to address in original ways deeply challenging problems. Creating a sanctuary for comfort and environment of intellectual constraint is not fulfilling our responsibility. It is only through an environment of intellectual challenge and the free expression and open discourse that provides that challenge that we are fulfilling our obligations to students and their future, to faculty and their research, and the future of our society. Thank you very much.
Four out of 2,000.
40.
Oh, 40. That's still not terrific.
Not so terrific.
It's not terrific. So what can you do?
Well, I am not in charge of the other 1,999. Now, if I was, I could do something. Seriously, I think it is a difficult problem, and I think when you really look at the forces, it's interesting to look at the forces on university administrations and the nature of the way students come into college. And I think both of these are important to understand when you think about this. First of all, if you are a university president, you have a complicated set of constituents. They all look at the university in a different way. They all want something else from you. It's an environment where many people feel very free to criticize you in all sorts of ways and do. And there are constantly problems you're dealing with. It's very easy to feel very buffeted. Now, if you do not get up every day with a clarity about what your principles are versus what are things, problems you have to solve, you are going to think about your job as well. I've got all these constituencies, I've got all these problems, I've got this one saying that one saying that, and I just try to get by without having the whole ship fall apart. Now, that's a really bad way to be a president, but it's not uncommon. And a part of the difficulty, I believe, is that there is not a very clear view and statement on the part of educational institutions as to what their mission is and what's necessary to achieve it. If you actually, who was I talking to about going on college tours and comparing one university to another? There's a lot of expression about colleges and universities that does not say in highly principled ways what is the fundamental thing we're about. And yeah, there are all sorts of other things. I'll give you one example. So I was talking to a university president. There was some meeting. I met a lot of people there, and I said, what's happening on your campus with respect to free expression? His answer was, my fundamental concern is the safety of our students. Now, I said, well, that's sort of like if I asked you, what's your strategy for the development of science at your university? And your answer is, my fundamental concern is lab safety. Now, of course you're concerned about lab safety. You can get hurt in a lab. And of course you care about the safety of your students, but that doesn't tell you what the principles are, and that is one big problem. You have people with lack of clarity about principles. And that means, what does an education really mean? Now, the second issue actually concerns what's happening in high schools, because if you talk to high school principals, as I've started doing, you ask them the following question. You say, you purposefully prepare your students so that when they graduate and go to college, they can take calculus or advanced calculus. You view that as a piece of your responsibility. You purposefully prepare students to be able to write an essay in an English class. You view that as part of your responsibility. Forget about how well they're doing it, but they, at least everybody accepts that that's my job, is to actually run a school where that's happening. And if you ask, okay, that's fine, do you view it as part of your responsibility to prepare students so that when they get into college, they understand and are ready for the more adult experience of being in an environment of intellectual challenge, open discourse, and free expression? Nobody says, yes, that is an absolutely important piece of what our responsibilities are. It's articulated, it's written down, and so on. Now, some high schools are doing a better job than others and having various programs where that becomes a natural part of the culture. But there's so much focus in high schools now about making sure everybody's comfortable. You can't say or do anything that upsets another student. And this is how students come into college. And they come in with this kind of unbelievably naive view that, yeah, it's okay to suppress speech. And why do they say that? Because then everybody will feel comfortable. And, the good people will suppress the speech of the bad people. Well, I mean, all that means is they've never studied any history at all. So this is an environment that is permeating our high schools, and it's a big problem, which is why I've started talking to a lot of high schools. And in fact, 1 week from today, I'm speaking to a gathering of something like 130 independent high school heads outside New York about exactly this topic. Ultimately, the whole educational infrastructure needs to step up to this. And there's no guarantee that they will. Boards have a role to play in making presidents feel uncomfortable. But if you don't have a president who can clearly articulate, what is our educational mission? What are we trying to accomplish? You've got a problem. What else?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
Outside of the uppermost layer of higher education, the rest of the sector is facing unprecedented financial challenge. We were starting to see multiple colleges failing every year with expectation of more to come. Is there a case to be made that expressing a commitment to freedom of expression will increase and improve the bottom line for these colleges? Can we demonstrate that colleges that protect freedom of expression do better in terms of enrollment, in terms of their financial position? And if so, how can we articulate that?
I would say it's not obvious, to be honest. The places, it would be nice if that were the case and that there was in fact a real market incentive. I'm just not sure that right now that's the case. Now, we get a lot of students right now who are coming to the University of Chicago because this is what they want. So that's been very good for us, but we got good students anyway. I like having students for whom this is important. But I'm not sure. I've not seen that analyzed in a way where I could see it happening.
There seems to be evidence on the negative, because we've seen schools where there have been rather high-profile flare-ups on the downside. University of Missouri being a prime example.
Yeah.
Evergreen State being another.
Right.
Are there examples on the positive side?
Out of the 40 institutions, I don't know. It's a really good question, but I don't have any examples in that direction. It's a very good question.
There's a question here.
Yeah.
Hi. So I've actually had the honor of attending some of the Axelrod events that his institute has had down there, and I found them to be very fair and unpartisan and unbiased. In terms of moving forward in the future, have you had conversations with someone like David Axelrod talking about how to maybe make it both sides and care about the future? I know that he's come out and supported a lot of the things that you've been moving forward with, and have you found common ground across the aisle, all aisles, in terms of that?
Yeah, so when I hired David to do that job. So we had a lot of conversation at that time because, at that time David was so identified with Barack Obama and Democratic candidates that I just wanted to make sure that this was going to be nonpartisan, going to have people from all sides. David said, yes, it was. That's what he wanted, and he wouldn't think of it any other way. And I think he's been 100% faithful to that. So I think he's done actually a spectacular job. And I think he has people come all the time that most places would shudder because the self-identified left would be up in arms. So I think David's done a fantastic job in this regard. And that's the thing, the more it becomes normal, and I'll just take Steve Bannon as another example. So Luigi Zingales invited Steve Bannon to come speak at the Booth School. And the format was going to be that Steve Bannon was going to debate Austin Goolsbee about trade policy. So, we got a number of letters from students and from faculty saying, oh, it's terrible, Bannon's been invited, can't you disinvite him? And he said, no, we don't want to disinvite anybody. Nobody has a right to walk onto the University of Chicago campus and say, I'm exercising my right of free speech. We're not a public institution. What we say in accordance with the nature of our education research, that if any faculty member or any recognized student group wants to invite somebody, they invite them, and that's it. And what we do is we stand behind their right or privilege, whatever you want to call it. Our policy is that they invite who they want because they want to hear them for educational or research purposes. And that's it. There's nothing more to say. So the answer is simply no. And people in the end actually accept it if you do it over and over and over again and you make it clear. And we had an interesting case. There was some protest that students at the law school wanted to have, which they did have, but they wanted real clarity about what was within our policy and what was outside our policy. And they got it, and during the protest, they had a clear statement. They'd written this, essentially a brief, as to why this was within the university's protest policy, which was great. There are other stories where you get these statements from students, demanding this or that, and you talk to the dean. You just say, look, the answer is no. Just say it simply and clearly, without any apology, and the answer is no. We're not going to do what you want us to do. And if you do this consistently, you're in a much better spot. Now, it would be naive on our part to believe we're immune from the nonsense going on. And in the end of the day, you only have so much control. But we're doing what we can. And I think we're in a better spot than just about any other place. But it doesn't mean we're either perfect internally or that we have enough control to deal with any situation. Oh, yeah.
Does the tenure system aggravate the problem?
The tenure system is complicated. There are ways in which it's good and ways in which it's not so good. I don't view it as, some people view it as just sort of theological good. Some people view it as an unmitigated disaster. I think both of these attitudes are kind of too simple. Around this particular issue, I don't think it aggravates the problem. I think it offers some protection. Now, of course, the protection can be used in unfortunate ways, but I think protection is generally, in this case, is leaning in a positive direction, but not only in a positive direction. Yeah.
Dr. Zimmer, thank you for helping us to clarify this issue at my alma mater, Colgate University, where you worked with our president, Brian Casey, who had worked with you at Brown, I believe, on this
Yes.
before that. So
Yeah.
we appreciate it because now this is a policy that is followed by faculty, staff, and students there, and it's made everyone feel a little more involved and more comfortable in addressing controversial issues, which are a natural part of college education, as you so well pointed out.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you. There's a mic right in back of you.
Thank you very much for your leadership on this issue and for joining us tonight. Is anyone issuing anything akin to an annual report on the state of speech on college campuses? And if not, would such report be helpful to you in your efforts?
Yeah, there is such an institution. It's called, the acronym is FIRE. I forget exactly. I can never remember what acronyms stand for. But it's basically an institution that I think is a great institution that is devoted to advocating, supporting free expression, but also they give you a grade. They give everybody a grade on all sorts of things. And it's very good. And in fact, it even helped us because they go through your policies. And, you've got so many policies written by somebody in student life 15 years ago or something nobody's looked at. But they look at it and they say, this doesn't actually comport with what you're saying. And so you look at it and you say, you're right, we'll fix it. So they've been great for us because we're on the same page. And so when they find stuff, they're like a free speech audit group for us. And audit committees are good. It's the only way of finding out stuff you can't find out any other way. So they are doing that, and I think they're really doing an excellent job of it.
If there aren't any more questions,
Okay.
ladies and gentlemen, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Again, thank you all so much for coming. Thanks to Jack and Goldie Miller and the entire Jack Miller Center team who put this all together. And thank you also again to not just President Zimmer, but to our great panel today. And thank you all for coming.